Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad afdika nabiyyika rasulika nabiyil ummi ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So the topic that I wanted to discuss with you guys today is on the topic of boundaries. And this is such an important one because I feel like a lot of new coaches and people starting off tend to have a lot of either to fall into two camps. One, they're either very cautious of boundaries to the point where it almost creates like an unhealthy distance with the client on sessions. And then the other camp, another extreme I see is sometimes being so involved and sometimes sympathizing so much with the client and taking on the client's pain that they feel emotionally drained and crippled in their conversations with the clients. I'm going to be discussing what it means to have healthy boundaries as a coach, and inshallah, some helpful tips and tools for you to be mindful of to bring into your sessions, into your relationships and conversations, inshallah, with your clients, and in terms of generally setting up your coaching practice. So first and foremost, let's establish that having boundaries is about protecting yourself and your client, right? Boundaries are not, I think sometimes people think of it as like, oh, it's almost like it's formal, or like, oh, it's just so complicated. And let's just simplify it. And this is the best way to, inshallah, frame and communicate with clients as well when you're starting off your relationship. Boundaries are there to protect you and protect me, and alhamdulillah, to strengthen our relationship in a way that serves you, and so I can support you best, right? Boundaries are a positive thing. Boundaries are really, alhamdulillah, helpful. All right. So that's the first and foremost thing, inshallah, is how you understand boundaries. Now, first, and as alhamdulillah, for us as believers in the conversation around boundaries, that for ourselves as a coach, that we need to be mindful of and really bring to the forefront of how we show up in our practice, is that it's modeled and informed by the Prophet, right? The Sunnah, and of course inspired by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the importance of like privacy. No client should ever feel that what they share on a session is going to go outside of that session. Like that should be it should be a given. And I know some people have like confidentiality agreements they'll do, or a contract with the client. You can do that. There's really no like one set way of doing it. But when it comes to coaching, I think it's really, really important for your own first and foremost integrity, inshallah, is to make sure that you are not you never ever share outside of a session what the client is bringing to it. And of course, if you're getting mentorship, that's very different. And you never have to name the client. You can share, this is the scenario I have. This is the challenge I'm having with the client I want to support on. That looks very different. So inshallah, I really encourage you, first and foremost, is for yourself to have that accountability, that integrity and honesty, and that the client should feel that I'm in a safe, confidential space and nothing will go outside of this. The next one that's really important, inshallah, and that we take from the Sunnah of the Prophet is being non-judgmental. A client is going to feel and sense when you're being judgmental in a session, and that is definitely going to cross some boundaries, and it's going to affect that relationship. So really being conscious of, are you being judgmental when they say something, really trying to have a neutral, warm face, really communicating and showing understanding and showing empathy, right? You can show empathy, not sympathy. So empathy is the word I'm going to be using a lot. But yes, so not having some kind of judgmental reactions or expressions on your face. And I've heard a few cases where new coaches, subhanAllah, are sharing, like the person shares something and the response is like almost like a judgmental, like, well, you shouldn't be doing that. And again, I hope, inshallah, like for those of you that join Adwan, we go into a lot of detail of how do you build rapport and questions and framing in a way when you're trying to help challenge a client and help them grow, how to do that effectively, instead of making those kind of accusative statements that can completely put a person's wall up and make them withdraw, and obviously may lead to severing that relationship. The other third part that is really important when it comes to setting a boundary, and inshallah, in terms of like guiding principles from our deen, is not over identifying with the client's emotions. not over identifying the client's emotions. And when you're avoiding judgment, this will be much easier to do. If you are judging, then you're probably going to identify with some of those emotions. And what does that mean? That means, the client can say that they're feeling sad, they're feeling grief about something. You don't want to take over and be like, yes, I feel really sad too when, et cetera, et cetera. And then you like start, sharing a full out story of how that emotion is so strong for you right now, or you're going through it. So you don't want to over identify. You want to give them the space, like this is their session, you're guiding them and supporting them. So that's a really important boundary to maintain as a coach, that you respect, their need in what they're communicating and what they're expressing, and give them empathy, but you do not cross that line, inshallah. Okay, so this brings me to the other big point when it comes to boundaries. So the idea of, the emotional dynamics professionally. So alhamdulillah, on a session, a client is obviously going to open up and share certain emotions. It's really important that you show empathy in the session versus sympathy. And again, this is something we go into detail in Adwam, and inshallah helping you create that distinction. But this balance is really important, because this is the difference between being compassionate, professional, maintaining, a good level of, again, that coaching and client relationship, versus taking on the client's pain and, making them, it can even lead to, a lot of, subhanAllah, creating like an emotional crutch or an unhealthy dynamic in relationship, where they feel like they need to only come to you every time they're distraught. So empathy would look like, validating, listening, really attentively listening, inshallah, reframing for them. This would be healthy ways of showing empathy, helping them explore what that is for them. So these are like the differences, and this is a really important boundary to maintain. So catch yourself, am I sympathizing or empathizing with the client, and when they're expressing emotions? And those are some quick points that you can inshallah use to distinguish yourself, to put that. Now, when it comes to, and here's like the last point and the biggest one, I think, because a lot of coaches will be like, how do I establish healthy boundaries? Like, how do I establish professional boundaries when it comes to clients? You first and foremost need to be clear on what those boundaries are for yourself and that you would like to have for your client, right? So actually first sit down. If you've never had this conversation with yourself, sit down and write it out, right? What are the boundaries? So when it comes to, and start from the get-go, the initial conversation and communication, what are the boundaries you'd like to have? When it comes to, inshallah, before a session and after a session, what are the boundaries that you would like to have? Is it email communication? Are you open to messaging? How often? How frequently? What are you? Because again, it varies for some people. Some coaches, or I know even therapists will, have like a check-in with their client. Some will be like, nope, communicate with me over email, or there's a specific thing you can update me on, but I don't respond after certain hours. So it really varies and depends. But you need to have clarity on them, because the worst thing you can do is start a coaching relationship with a client and let them dictate what the boundary should be. And then you'll end up in situations like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this. You know what? This is feeling overwhelming. I can't keep up with this. So that's when a client is pretty much, guiding that session, guiding what those boundaries should look like. And that can be really dangerous, because, like I said, it can lead to burnout, it can lead to overwhelm and not sustainable. And then you have the boundary conversation, it might be really uncomfortable. So right from the get-go, so once you've established what you want those boundaries to look like, right from the get-go, what you want to do, inshallah, is when you start taking a new client, you establish that in the conversation. You say, hey, here's how I work with clients. Here's the boundaries I have in place to protect yourself and me, so that we have, inshallah, the healthiest relationship, and you get to make the most out of this experience together, right? Or we get to make the most out of this experience together, and then list them out. So, I require, this can be your cancellation policy, can fall in there as well. But you could say, this is like whatever the boundary is. For example, I wait 15 minutes on a session, and if after that you are not on, I'll follow up with an email, and consider that a no-show. That can be a boundary and kind of like a cancellation policy. Your expectation, I expect my clients, I'm going to be on time unless there's ever an emergency. I will be on time on my sessions. I expect the same courtesy from my clients. It could be, after sessions, I am happy to have a check-in once a week where, I ask my clients to share an update and via message or via email. And I would love to, hear after a session how you're processing things. And, I would love that communication from you. So that's a check-in I have. And then you can see, is that something you're open with or comfortable with? The client's like, oh, that feels a lot for me and I don't want to do that. Okay, that's fine. So you communicate that. And you can say, I like to have, this much time between my sessions, or I don't do personal phone calls in between sessions. So if you're ever, struggling, you want an emergency session, please email me and I'll see if I can accommodate. That's a boundary that you're setting an expectation. So that's where, alhamdulillah, like already listing them out when the client initially joins or, hops on to like do a session with you, that agreement, that would be where you establish those boundaries. Now, if there's things that come up along the way, where you feel like certain boundaries, like don't, some certain things are happening that you're like, this is crossing a boundary for me, then you definitely want to have those conversations with the client and not shy away from it. Because if you continue to ignore it, it won't be helpful. So this could be like, if a client keeps changing things last minute, or if certain things are happening on the session where they're seeking maybe a lot more sympathy than empathy, or seeking, certain things that you're not comfortable doing or sharing, then that might be an opportunity to explore that boundary and say, maybe it's time to refer you elsewhere. I feel like, perhaps I'm not able to give you what you're seeking. So you have to be comfortable being able to, inshallah, step away and honor that. And so I think the final thing I'll share with you in this conversation is it's really important to respect your boundaries. Obviously, respecting your clients, but respecting yours, so because this is what, inshallah, you will do to avoid burnouts, right? This is what, alhamdulillah, is going to help you significantly avoid falling into patterns of exhaustion and almost, to an extent, I'd say even like resenting, doing the work. Because if you feel like you're constantly stretching yourself beyond what you'd like to, that can show up in negative ways. So I want to hear from you guys. What are some boundaries you have in place? What are some ideas or thoughts around boundaries you had not explored before this session today? If you're, inshallah, starting your coaching journey, or you're an established coach, but you want to go further and you definitely want the Islamic framework in serving, alhamdulillah, the people that you do. Adwam Life Coaching Certification is, alhamdulillah, an ongoing program that we have at Discover You. There are, mashallah, a wealth of resources and modules and knowledge that you're going to get in that. We have our community as well, and weekly group coaching sessions with myself and, alhamdulillah, some of our other coaches, our senior coaches and teachers that you get to benefit from. So go and explore that. And inshallah, I get to see you next week, Tuesday, Coaching Corner, again, 9:30 a.m. We're back on that time. So that's next Tuesday. I'll get to see you then. And I can't wait to share, inshallah, another, I hope, a valuable topic that you'll get a lot away from. So if there's anything you benefit from today, drop in those gems so others can benefit as well. And I'll see you guys next week. Assalamu alaikum.